From the draft chaos this past week to an incredibly anticipated and what should be explosive free agency period starting tomorrow, the Winnipeg Jets are in for a wild ride.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we're kicking off with some reflections from this weekend's draft and thoughts heading into what will be a very crazy free agency period. Although, we are seeing some very early signs that perhaps the chaos of free agency might have been dampened a bit by today's developments. But first, we want to chat about the draft. Before we dive into some thoughts on who Winnipeg picked and how they might fit into Winnipeg's brand new direction in terms of their drafting strategy and all, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, like I said, the Jets made a number of selections. They had just a handful of picks this year. They have added 5 players to their organization, and we talked about Sasha Boumedienne last week. If you missed it, Boumedienne I described as feeling like a pseudo-Sandberg sort of pick, right? A young player who's actually one of the youngest, or if not the youngest skater in college hockey right now, which, you know, for that alone is already very impressive, but he actually earned himself a fairly large deployment and generous deployment on Boston University's top-end blue line from the start of the season till the end of it. His first year in college was a little bit up and down, but on the second half of the season, his offense started to sort of pop, and a lot of the rawness in his game started to turn more into competence, which for a young player, going up against early 20s guys is really, really impressive. He is one of the best skating blue liners in this year's draft. It seems like the Jets were actually considering trading down until they realized he was still on the board, and so they opted to go for him. It seems like he was pretty high on their most wanted list. So Boumedienne, very interesting. I am obviously fond of these kinds of picks. The Jets have gotten very good at identifying certain tool sets that they like, and a lot of the prospects that they tend to draft with these sort of skill sets usually do translate and start to develop and grow. So keep an eye on Boumedienne for the next few years. He could be a real gem. The rest of the draft, I think, has some similar thought processes. At 92nd overall, they got Owen Martin from the Spokane Chiefs. Martin, obviously, you look at his stats, they don't really pop off immediately. But the thing with him is that he's a defense-first center, and a lot of his game has really started to improve as his deployments have gotten more important and as he's gained more trust. And really, he just seems to be slowly ramping his game up from defense focused to a more well-rounded 2 game with some real legitimate offensive pop. Obviously, the production doesn't appear to be there just yet, but I think over time, as he starts to get more responsibility and he fills in for some of the centers who are graduating ahead of him, he will start to take on a really big role with the Chiefs. He's a kind of an Adam Lowry sort of looking player, not exactly as big or as physically developed right now, but keep an eye on him for the longer term. He could be an intriguing middle 6 option, and he actually legit, unlike Rucker McCrory, did grow up a Jets fan. He's been to Jets games. He's from Oakbank, so this is a pretty fun pick. Yes, you could argue that there were maybe some players who might have had slightly higher ceilings available, but I feel like when the Jets make one of these picks, they have really started to hit on, these sort of improving year-over-year players. They looked at his production and they saw improvements in his game. They identified tool sets that they think leads to longer-term success in the future. I think the Jets are really good at this. This is one of those areas where when Winnipeg makes a call, I really never question it. Their drafting has gotten really good, especially with some of these sort of bigger swing forwards that they project on. if they think he's got something that could really translate to NHL duty, I'm totally cool with it. Getting a player out of your 92nd pick, that's pretty darn great. At 156 overall, another sort of player in this area, a little smaller for what the Jets usually go for, but Victor Klingzel from Skellefteå. He is one of the higher skilled forwards taken, especially for the place that he was taken. He was actually predicted to go somewhere in maybe in the second or third round. He was ranked as high as I think the low 70s. There were some folks who were very high on him. He's a very intriguing player. He's not the most physical, but he relies on vision, passing, and spatial awareness, and he's got some really good skating and creativity. The biggest challenge for Victor right now is that he tends to do a lot of his work from the perimeter, which, most NHLers really attack the faceoff circles in the slot. So that's where you really want to see him develop. But in his age group, he is one of the top-ranked prospects and has just really performed well for, the Swedish, youth teams and at the international youth tournaments. So, again, keep an eye on him. He could be something really intriguing in the future. He's got some real work to do, but this is one of those players in a position that the Jets don't have a lot of depth in. And if he does start to really click over the next couple of seasons and really improves to the adult pro levels, it could be a very fun draft pick coming into Winnipeg. We need more skill. We could use more skating and scoring ability. Klingzel might be that guy. If nothing else, there's a highlight of him grittying after scoring a goal, so that's pretty funny. But I think he could be very, very intriguing. Now, the last couple of picks the Jets did pick up, you have Edison Engel. Engel from some USHL scouts was actually pretty favored. A very smooth skating two-way D. Doesn't exactly have crazy offensive production, but seems like he could, over the next couple of years, turn into something interesting. He's an NCAA commit and actually received both applause from his future OHL team and his future collegiate team for the draft pick, which is fascinating. You don't really see that, and it's probably going to be a more regular occurrence with the new agreements, but Engel could be interesting. A lot of people, again, praise his skating, and I think that that's something the Jets have really started to hone in on for their future blue line is puck-moving ability married to good footwork. So keep an eye on that. Last guy, Jacob Cloutier from the Saginaw Spirit. We have another Spirit player coming in from, Cole Perfetti's former team. Cloutier doesn't have a ton of offensive jump right now, but again, is one of those longer term players. He doesn't have a ton of elite technical finesse, but he does seem to have, a motor. He's a pretty okay skater. Stride's a little choppy, and he has some work to do in overall mobility. But, one of these guys who, with time, could become perhaps a middle six AHL player, which when you're swinging in the 6th or 7th round, getting a guy who can actually play in your pro org and provide some scoring depth and maybe some underrated talent for, your farm team really isn't the worst development. So, whether he plays in the NHL or not, it's kind of irrelevant. Just even making the pro dance would be really awesome. Overall, I give this Jets draft probably a B+. I think that this is one of those where they may not have drafted anyone particularly spectacular, but they have this sort of higher floor approach. And I think they also tend to be very smart about when they draft guys with this higher floor. They find guys who are likely to have solid pro careers, and they actually seem to identify some players who also have very underappreciated upside. You think about the Waltons and the Hees of the world. That's where the Jets are really starting to make their bread and butter. I almost call this team, if the Jets were an MLB franchise, they would be specialists in elite relievers. And I think Winnipeg is starting to really hone in on a couple of different archetypes in their draft picks, which I think is great. So I like this class. I think the Jets did well. They didn't have a ton to work with. They didn't have the deepest class to work with. And yet, once again, as they've done the past couple of years, I think that they've added some really interesting talent, and it could be a couple of sleepers here in this org. So get excited for some of these guys. Boumedienne, I think, will be an NHLer down the road, and maybe Martin and Klingzel too. So keep an eye out for their names. Of course, they're all joining development camp this week. So exciting times if you like Winnipeg Jets youth. Now, of course, right after the draft, this weekend saw some real action. And today, I think the floodgates have really started to open ahead of the July 1st free agency deadline. Let's chat about the chaos heading into what will be one of the more unpredictable moments in Jets history coming right up. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Now, I've seen FanDuel, I've used it before myself, and can personally attest to the detail and the efficiency and ease of access, whether you're trying to do same game parlays or looking to cash in on that next winning stats category. If you think maybe one of these teams in the Club World Cup is going to score 3 goals against an opponent, or maybe you think that Messi or some of these other guys are going to have standout performances, this is your chance to win big. And if you're new to FanDuel, there's an even better offer. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we are chatting a little bit about some of the chaos today. Obviously, free agency was really a scary time for a lot of teams. We're seeing a lot of squads kind of scrambling to make sense of what to do. And I think, we're seeing more and more extensions being done ahead of July 1st tomorrow, which is a little unusual. You don't really see that happen. Amidst all that, though, the biggest deal that everyone was kind of waiting on was the whole Mitch Marner thing. Marner was kind of really the big centerpiece deal that had yet to be completed. And this is kind of agnostic of any trades. The Marner swap, whether it was in free agency or an actual trade, it had to happen. Somebody was going to do it. And Vegas has really been aggressive at being, the team that's been most linked to Marner among a handful. But I think Vegas was probably the favorite from the start. Vegas got Marner in exchange for Nicolas Roy, who went to Toronto. And Marner signed a $12 million 8-year deal. Very interesting, right? You don't often see a player of his caliber taking what looks to be on the surface a bit of a discount, but $12 million, look, it's a lot, but I think he honestly could have gotten more with another team. But that 8 years of guaranteed salary with a big winning organization seems to be a pretty compelling argument. You look at some of what's happening elsewhere. After that deal, you started seeing some other free agents extending. Marchand signed for 6 years with the Panthers, a little over $6 million. Then you had Ekblad before him also signing for $6 million. Guys taking real sweetheart deals to stay there, basically maxing out the Panthers cap just perfectly. I don't know how they're going to manage that, but they have got their team for the next couple of years. They feel like they can likely three-peat, 3 consecutive Cup championship wins. They're going for it. So really respect the gutsiness of that. And then you also saw in between some really random things. You had, a big deal out in Columbus, which the Columbus one's one of the strangest things. They signed Provorov for 7 years at $8.5 million, which I don't quite understand that one. That's a lot of money. And if you are looking at the free agent class of defenders, right, we've seen quite a few interesting contracts being rumored. Gavrikov, we're still waiting on, and that could be a really hefty one. But this one actually does really impact the Jets. Ekblad making $6 million, Provorov making $8.5 million. You're starting to realize that this price range for Sandberg's probably going to be higher than we thought. If it's a long-term deal, it does start to seem like you're looking at $6 million for him, which, look, I love Sandberg, and I think that this $6 million, not really a big deal. I just think compared to what you would expect in previous years, the past often dictated that players like Sandberg made more in the $4 to $5 million range. But with the way that things are going now, I think we're just seeing a different era. This is not going to be the same cap hit that we've seen in previous years. Maybe Sandberg doesn't quite have the craziest offense, but it doesn't really matter. It just seems like as the cap's going up, all these players are signing bigger and bigger extensions. And Sandberg, for me, I feel like this is going to be a really good deal either way. I'm excited to have him locked up, and I'm sure that we are going to see that announcement in the very near future. Has to be, in the next few hours release show. It should be hopefully a good one for the Jets, and I'm excited. Gabriel Velarde, still not really hearing a lot about that. So Winnipeg, whatever they're doing, seems to be pretty close to the vest, but we'll just have to wait and see until sometime tomorrow. But really some strange deals out there. One thing that I think is worth really shouting out, we did see Evan Bouchard signing a mega deal, $42 million for 4 years. What's fascinating about that is the term. So a lot of the contracts that we're likely going to be seeing from many players, especially bigger name talents, probably on the shorter side, because guys are going to wait for the cap to go up to cash in on that next raise, especially if they feel that they can make even more. So this is going to be a new era for the NHL. Revenues are going up. We're seeing, expansion slots really being popular. Franchise valuations continue to shoot up. This is a very big period of growth for the NHL, and that means that sticker shock is probably going to be a thing for a lot of teams. That could include the Jets, if we're being honest. What that means for our current RFAs and stuff, I really couldn't tell you. I do think Sandberg's going to be a bit more than we expect. The contract that I'm probably most nervous about is what Kyle Connor makes. He's going to get paid a lot, but I do think that Marner may have set a bit of a ceiling, right? 12 million is probably the max, so to speak, but we'll just have to wait and see what all of that looks like the closer we get to KFC's extension. It's not the most urgent situation since he's got another year, but obviously the Jets probably want to get this done before the end of summer and before he even plays another Jets game. So a lot of work to do there. But, this has been a pretty crazy last 24 hours. We saw the Nicholas Hag trade, of course. Sissons and Lauzon went to Vegas. Hag then went to Nashville and got extended for 4 years at $5.5 million per, which is something. That is definitely a contract that you could sign. We saw Morgan Geekie signing with the Bruins for 6 years. He's making a little over $5 million a season, which is a really good deal. Actually similar to the Marchand deal. I slightly misspoke. It was closer to like $5.5 million per season for him. But Geekie at a little over $5 million per season feels like a really good value contract. That I think is the kind of value that you're going to really enjoy as a Bruins fan, especially since there aren't many bright spots for Bruins fans to really enjoy. So yeah, man, this is going to be an interesting next 24 hours. We have, all of this kind of coming through, lots of players signing deals. You have Hayden Fleury re-signing with the Jets for 2 years. The Fleury extension kind of got lost amidst all of the chaos. My take on, Hayden coming back for 2 years, I don't really hate it. I also don't care about it that much, but they liked his playoff performance. I don't think he's, a particularly strong blue liner. He does skate really well, and I think that tends to overshadow any of his defensive deficiencies in decision-making, but I mean, it's whatever. I just think the Jets continue to cycle through a lot of third pairing D, and I wonder at what point do they start to really stabilize who they're actually locking down. So tomorrow, or maybe in the days after, we'll have to see what happens with Shen, Heinola, a few other guys. They've got some real choices to make, and, they need to cut some of these dudes loose because they can't keep having 4 or 5 guys rotating on your third pairing and eating $6 million cap space. It's just not really sustainable. So hopefully the Jets kind of narrow it down tomorrow, make some harder decisions, and kind of get their blue line in order for the upcoming season because, having so many guys rotating in and out and, eating up more cap space that you probably need to make another acquisition or two, it's just not that efficient. But hey, the Jets will do the Jets. They'll figure it out. Hopefully they can do it before free agency opens tomorrow because my goodness, the rumors of what we are hearing potentially happening and what is likely to occur now that the Marner deal has processed, it's going to be crazy, right? And, Ehlers is at the center of it. Boeser is at the center of it. And amidst all this, so are the Winnipeg Jets. I want to chat about that coming right up. Hey, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about what is going to be a very intriguing day of free agency. And for the Winnipeg Jets, this could be a really franchise-defining moment. The Jets right now aren't really being linked to a lot, and what we do know from Winnipeg is that they've been linked to 2 free agents, Brock Boeser and Andrew Mangiapane, And they are still trying to make the Ehlers thing happen. But based on what has happened over the last few hours, Ehlers is as good as gone. I don't think that we have any real shot at signing him, and the market is really starting to favor Nick and his agent. He is very likely in range to get a $9 to $9.5 million contract, which the Jets probably can't afford. I don't think that they would want to pay him that, especially when they use him behind Mason Appleton in ice time. And with Ehlers looking to go to a winning organization, he wants a team that's going deep in the postseason. So apparently he'd actually be willing to take a little bit under what he could get in open market to make that fit work. And if that's the case, it's not going to be the Jets. Winnipeg is a good team in the regular season, but I do think we know where they tend to end up in the postseason. And I think Ehlers is just looking for a change of scenery. So Carolina is the team that continues to be the front runner. Unless somebody comes in at the last second and really wows him, which is possible, I just don't think that that's really happening. And it puts the Jets in a tight spot. Winnipeg now needs to replace Nick. And I know a lot of people on social media and maybe even in the comments have suggested that Ehlers' impact is not going to be that big of a deal, right? His loss is not going to matter. I can assure you, if you actually dig into the numbers and how this team performed last year, especially during the regular season, Nick's presence on the power play, for one thing, is going to be a huge problem. He was one of the really big secret straws that stirred the drink. That roaming ability and rotational skill of his really made the Jets' power play almost unbeatable. It was already going to be good with guys like Connor, Vilardi, and Scheifele, but then tossing in Ehlers to rotate in all of these different positions just made the unit so unpredictable and almost impossible to stifle. So, replacing that's going to be hard. And then you have to run into the problem of, Nick being one of your best transition skaters and also just being good enough at a certain level to where if you replace him with somebody, they're likely not going to be anywhere near as good as he is. And so that's going to have a domino effect on your matchup ability. We're already likely to be missing Lowry for some part of the start of the season. We're seeing guys probably having to step up and be elevated into positions that normally they wouldn't be. And so that puts a lot of strain on some players who probably would be more likely to be in the bottom six to start the year. We might see some prospects put in elevated positions. The Jets might also try and make a power play for a big player, and it seems like Brock Boeser is plan A. Now, Boeser, I like Brock, right? I think he's a good player. I have long kind of appreciated his finishing talent, and I think in another timeline, I would have been pretty thrilled about a Jets contract with him. Winnipeg likes Boeser. Boeser seems to have an appreciation for the Jets. I don't think it's a great fit, and it's not really a question of the culture or anything. I think with Boeser, he needs really specific circumstances to thrive on a team. He's not the fastest skater, and I think his tool sets tend to be a little more on the finishing side. It's not a problem, but I just think the Jets need a good center to pair with him. And right now, we're kind of looking at Scheifele, Taves, Nemesnikov, Barron, Gustafsson. Our center depth is not great. Lowry's going to take some time, and we don't really know what he's going to be like when he comes back. And so your center depth, suddenly you realize you don't have a lot of speed down the middle. And the Jets don't have a lot of high-end skill to give Boeser the right pairing partner. Maybe you try Perfetti back down there. Maybe you try Vilardi back down there. I really couldn't tell you what Winnipeg's plan here is. I still think Taves at 2C is what they're thinking starting the year. And I don't think that that's really the way that you're going to shelter a Brock Boeser signing. And Boeser's contract, based on the market right now, it's starting with an 8, at least $8 million. So I just feel like that's a lot of money. Now, I know people will say, well, you'd want to pay Ehlers the same thing, and that's right, because Ehlers has a really strong 5v5 impact, and his 5v5 scoring rate is one of the highest in the league. Boeser's not really the same kind of player. And I think with the Jets needing to get faster and more skilled, I just don't know if Brock is going to be the right fit for the team. But I do think the Jets are going to try and make that fit happen. They're probably going to offer him a similar contract to what they offered Ehlers. I think my hope is that somebody outbids them, because I just think as much as you do need to replace Nick, I think a Boeser signing does run the risk of eating up a lot of cap space, and Boeser's decline has already been happening for the past couple of years. If he starts to decline really quickly after age 30, you are married to a very difficult contract. It is a lot more movable in the new cap era, but I don't think you want to force yourself to have to pay somebody to take it on. So for the Jets, I think this is one of those scenarios where free agency is just maybe not the best option. I know that the team desperately needs to make acquisitions. I'm all for that, but I think you have to be really smart about it. Don't just commit money to commit money. As much as I do appreciate Boeser's goal scoring ability, I think that there are some other warning flags with him that might suggest that, he comes to the Jets, he might look a little more like a Monahan or a Toffoli. Monahan was good for the regular season, did not do well in the postseason. Toffoli really struggled in both parts of his tenure with the Jets. So, I think Winnipeg kind of needs to go a different direction. But I also know that the team is worried about revenue. They're trying to make the playoffs. They see this as their cup window. And I really go back and forth because I don't really know what the answer is here. You are in between a really tough spot, a rock and a hard place on this one because you've said goodbye to Ehlers, and Ehlers, doesn't want to come back and hasn't really been utilized the way that you would expect. The Jets don't really have a lot of internal options, so they're going to have to go externally. And if they're not willing to trade prospects and picks to try and improve the team that way, they're going to turn to free agency. And free agency is really not the place to go for big name free agents. That's where you overspend and get yourself into some real trouble. I honestly think Boeser could get closer to $9 million, and that's a lot of money, man. Could it work? Yeah, absolutely. It could work. It could be a great fit. And maybe it ends up being, an ideal signing. But I would have a lot of skepticism and pause before I'd want to throw that much money out there. If he comes to the Jets, more power to him. Will be good to see him as a Jet. I have in the past really enjoyed his game, and I think maybe he could do some really good work for Winnipeg. But again, I would just be real careful about how much you commit into one big contract like this, especially when this year kind of feels like you're already going to take a step back. You're going to be saying farewell to some bigger players for this team. You got some kids coming up. Maybe this isn't the worst year if you don't have the best finish. Even if you miss the postseason, right? Which, might seem really awful. This year's draft could really give the Jets a huge boost. I don't really want to talk about that yet before the season's even started, but I do think that, if that's what happens, that's not the worst outcome. So don't just, put yourself in a really mushy middle where Boeser comes in and he doesn't really move the needle and you get stuck with a big money contract that no one else really wants to take on if it doesn't go well. And then you find yourself having to kind of toil again with these mid-round picks. I think if you use this year as a growth year, you could have a much better subsequent season. So give yourself flexibility and don't lock yourselves down to something that you're going to regret. But we'll have to see how Winnipeg answers this. This is going to be a very interesting free agency day. We might not see Ehlers or Boeser signed for at least a couple of days as they weigh their options, but hopefully the Jets just are sensible, right? If Boeser gets a contract under $8 million, I'm probably pretty okay with that. But it's not really fair to expect. It's not fair to ask. And I hope that he just gets his payday wherever he wants. He seems like a nice guy. And, I'm sure he'll have plenty of suitors, including teams like the Kings. So lots of moving parts. We'll have to see how the Jets navigate it. Give me your predictions on an Ehlers and Boeser contract in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back here tomorrow with Jets coverage and hopefully some big free agent extension announcements. But see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.